Hello, and welcome to today's PeopleSoft Playbook webinar. My name is Jana Sloan, and I will be your moderator for today's event. Before we begin, a few housekeeping measures. Your mics are on mute, so if you have any questions, simply type them in the questions box throughout the webinar. There will be time for a Q&A at the end. Also, today's webinar will be recorded and made available online. A link will be provided on the last slide of the PowerPoint. Today's presenter is Mike Knecht. Mike Knecht has over 20 years of industry experience. His focus has been on strategy and implementation services associated with enterprise integration, applications, cloud solutions, and IT governance. Through the years, he's played several roles related to hands-on development, project and technical team oversight, business development, solution architecture, strategy consulting, consulting practice management, and executive leadership. He has presented at many events on a variety of topics, including enterprise integration, API enablement, integration and API governance, and business process management. Mike joined Sierra-Cedar in 2012 and is the Associate Vice President of the Integration and Cloud Solutions team, which focuses on services related to enterprise integration and APIs. These services include integration strategy and roadmap planning, as well as implementation services for MuleSoft and Oracle integration platforms. Under Mike's leadership, Sierra-Cedar was awarded the 2018 Customer Success Partner of the Year in North America by MuleSoft. Mike graduated from the University of Notre Dame and lives in Orange County, California, where he enjoys spending time with his wife and 2 kids. Mike, we're excited to have you join us today. Welcome. I will now turn today's presentation over to you.
Great, thanks, Jana. Appreciate that. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for jumping on the presentation. As Jana mentioned, my name is Mike Knecht, and I am the Associate VP of the Integration and Cloud Solutions team here at Sierra-Cedar. I'm not going to spend a lot more time on me. Jana gave more than enough information for you guys, but I did want to put some contact information on here. This session will be recorded, so if you want to come back and reach out to me with any other questions or follow-up, please don't hesitate to do so. I also put my LinkedIn contact information on there. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. This is webinar 4 of our series of webinars here, and this one is entitled Winning Strategies for Modern Integration in the New PeopleSoft World. The things I'm going to go through with you today, I'm going to give a little bit of information about Sierra-Cedar. I'm not going to spend too much time there, and then we're going to jump into some integration challenges where I think are pretty common among all organizations and things that hopefully you guys will be able to relate to. And then we'll talk about some centralized integration concepts and some of these new ways of going about solving these problems that are proving to be very successful for organizations. We'll also talk about specific PeopleSoft integration tools and how that all plays into it. So we'll start off kind of application agnostic for a while, and then I want to pull in specifically some of the PeopleSoft aspects, since I know that's a key focus for a lot of people on this call. And then a few steps on how to get started moving towards a modern integration approach. Obviously, at the end, we will do some Q&A. So if you have questions throughout this, please go ahead and put them into the little question window, and Jana will track those, and we'll get to those at the end. So about Sierra-Cedar, if you guys have been on some of our previous presentations, you might have seen some of this. I'm not going to go through each piece of it, but Sierra-Cedar does provide several different or different services. The group that I lead focuses on the integration and API services on the left side there in red. We work with all of our different business units at Sierra-Cedar. You can see that we've got 5 different industry focuses: commercial, healthcare, higher education, public sector, and justice and public safety. My team is part of our shared services group, and we work with all of those industries. Today's presentation is going to be industry agnostic. So even though I might use some examples specific to one industry, the concepts will be universal throughout. If you have some specific needs or questions about your industry, please put them into the question window, or we can do a follow-up afterwards. But I'm going to try to keep this generic for everybody's benefit. All right. So our group, the Integration and Cloud Solutions team, provides all different kinds of services. Like I said, we work with all the different industries, And we do everything from strategy and planning up front through full implementation, enablement, training, mentoring, health checks, you name it. We eat, live, and breathe integration. So to a lot of you who sometimes get that look of fear in your eye when you hear the word integration, that's what we do day in and day out. So hopefully some of our experiences can be beneficial to you as we talk through these concepts. All right, before we begin, I do want to say one thing up front here. Integration is a term that's used very broadly by a lot of people to cover a lot of different things. So I wanted to make clear at the beginning here that one specific differentiation here, a lot of times integration will be considered ETL. How do you move your data from a database into a data warehouse, or massive amounts of data movement for backups, things like that. So the integration that we'll be talking about here today is more transactional integration, record by record, which is usually what you see for process automation, for sending a transaction that needs to be updated across multiple systems, or if you update a customer record, you need to update a lot of systems. That type of transactional integration, as opposed to a nightly batch run where you're sending 50,000 records from one database to another. That one's more of an ETL bulk load type of thing. So I wanted to differentiate that. The integration strategy would include both topics, but right now we're going to focus on the transactional side. And a couple notes on here as well. When I say bulk data movement for ETL, that doesn't mean that you can't move massive amounts of data on a transactional level. You can move thousands or millions of transactions very easily with transactional data integration, but it's not picking up one huge chunk and moving it. It'd be more record by record in most cases. So now that we've got that one done, let's jump into integration. So why are we having this presentation? Why is integration a key concept? There's some information on here that we've pulled from our 2018-19 HR Systems Survey, and it's a little bit alarming when you see that over half of the organizations have no standard approach specific to HR technology integration. Now that's just focused on HR data. Obviously integration spans all different aspects of your business, but over half have no standard approach just for HR data. And if you look at the graph down here on the left, only 27% actually have an integration strategy at the organizational level in place. Some are regularly updated, some are very rarely updated. That's a huge gap, especially in the world that we are in today, where we have such a dependency on connectivity, all information being up to date at all times across all devices. There's more devices than ever before. We have new SaaS applications always being introduced at organizations. Integration is becoming more and more important. There's becoming a bit of a reduced tolerance, so to speak, for batch and scheduled jobs. If somebody enters some data in one system and they'll go into another system and they look at it, they expect it to be the same. So that tolerance that we once had for, oh, I'll wait till tomorrow and maybe it'll be up to date, that's not there anymore. And I think it's just going to be more and more the case as we move forward in these next few years. Let me jump on to the next one here. Another interesting thing we found in that same survey was that the presence of an integration strategy for an organization is actually more influential on that organization's ability to achieve their desired business outcomes than these things listed on the right here, than moving to the cloud, investing in data analytics, improving talent management. So it's a big factor in driving towards tomorrow's technology and really being competitive in the marketplace. So, when we talk about business outcomes here, it's basically what you're trying to achieve as a business and how do you measure that. Those organizations that have that integration strategy in place are more able to achieve that. So that doesn't surprise me with what I do. I've seen how it can enable a lot from a business standpoint, competitive advantage, keeping up with your competitors. And the other thing that I think is just as important of all that is the innovation side of it, the doors that it opens up for you. A lot of you are probably familiar with a whiteboard like this. At some point, you've probably drawn one out. You don't need to worry about trying to get in there and read all the details of it. This is more just a representation of one integration diagram that I've seen over the years, and it's pretty common. In fact, there was one client that I went to where I asked, what kind of integration strategy they have, and they actually walked me down the hall to an office, turned on the light, and they had a whiteboard kind of like this one with a similar diagram. And they also had a sign just like this one, says, "Please do not erase." And it's kind of funny because this actually is an integration strategy for a lot of organizations. And if that got erased, oh, that just went away. Now they don't know what they have anymore. So it's amazing how common this is. And this is something that we want to look at, trying to help organizations overcome and come up with an approach that's not quite so spaghetti-like. A lot of times we call this spaghetti integration. So as I jump down here, the kind of the next level of, I guess, sophistication is actually getting this onto an electronic version. But you can see it doesn't change the complexity of what's going on, in some cases the confusion. So this is another example. I did block out a few of the pieces on here. I don't want you to look too specifically at the systems as much as just the nature of what's going on here. So we do have PeopleSoft, HCM, and financials in the middle. This organization happened to be higher education as well, so they had campus solutions in there. But some of the things you can see in here are, different ways of interacting with PeopleSoft HCM. So you've got integration broker, you've got component interface, you've got direct database connections. They're using SQRs to dump files out, which isn't done as commonly anymore, but there still are some organizations that are doing it. So files, direct connections, database connections, there's a couple web service calls that are taking place, a lot of different ways of solving problems. The other thing that's significant about that is a lot of these different approaches are actually getting the same data. So in some cases, somebody is opening up a database connection, writing a query. Others, they're getting that exported into a file. Other times they're using integration broker. There's a lot of different ways that they're getting the same data out. And there's nothing that keeps them from potentially getting the data a little differently. So if they're trying to get a customer record, for example, or this is HCM, we'll say an employee record, maybe they're querying it a little bit differently. And now you've got the potential of inconsistency of data from place to place, and you've got reports that aren't lining up. Or maybe they're writing a query that's not, properly written, and you might be actually impacting the performance of your transactional system. There's a lot of challenges with this outside of just the maintenance and monitoring challenges. And then if you bring an auditor in, I don't even think I need to tell you how much they're going to have a field day with that type of a thing, because they're going to want to see, I need to know everybody that has access to personally identifiable information, your employee records. If this is how your strategy is set up and your structure, it's going to be hard for you to answer that question. So how do you get to that level of spaghetti integration? What happened that suddenly it became such a huge endeavor to try and sort that stuff out? So let's start this kind of at square one here, and we'll keep PeopleSoft in the middle of this, since I know that's most relevant to everybody. So PeopleSoft, HCM, and financials, there's already pre-built integrations so that they can share data between themselves. But you've also got a lot of other applications, and this is going to show just a couple that I picked out of, out of nowhere, just to show some examples here. Odds are you've got dozens of applications that are all interacting. And when they all start wanting to get data from PeopleSoft, HCM, and financials, these lines start to add up. And now, you also have to realize that a lot of those applications are going to be interacting with each other that aren't even related, not even related to PeopleSoft. So you've got integrations now going directly between those applications. And as you start adopting cloud applications or bringing more applications to the picture, the lines just keep on going. So before you know it, you've got spaghetti integrations. The challenges associated with this, I touched on a couple of them, but audits obviously are a nightmare. Management and monitoring becomes very cumbersome. It's almost impossible to know all the different ways that data is getting placed to place or finding out what went wrong. The ability to change applications or integrations, that's an important one that usually people find out the hard way after the fact. So to explain that one, imagine we replace this order management. You've got a special order management system that's sitting down here, the green box. Imagine we change that out, we replaced it with another application. You'd have to go into each one of these applications that's directly integrating with order management and change how that, what we call point-to-point integration, is communicating with that new system. Now it's on a different server, or it's a different way of interacting with it. So each one of those point-to-point integrations becomes a challenge and a maintenance problem. You'll have to go back with people that have skills for each one of those other applications, figure out how to repoint it. And again, you still got the same challenges with data integrity and people potentially getting the data improperly or in an inconsistent way. That's going to take a lot of time, and a lot of organizations even avoid upgrading an application because of the impact on integrations. And that's a real problem, right? These applications are going to be fundamental to your ability to do business or serve your customers effectively. And if you're not able to upgrade or replace an application because you're feared that you're going to break the integrations, that's a big problem. Especially in today's world where speed of change and adaptability, agility are so important. You don't want to be tied down to something like that where you can't change an application out. So let's go and look then at what do we do about this. Actually, before we do that, Jana, I'm going to have you kick off a quick poll here. We're going to do 3 polls throughout the day today, just to kind of keep everybody engaged. And I'm curious to get some information from you. So this first one here is, how much of this integration spaghetti do you think exists in your own organization today? None. You're already on top of this and you've got it all figured out. Maybe some change or some integration spaghetti, but it's manageable. Or is it starting to pile up? Or for those of you that are brave enough to admit it, bring on the meatballs, it's spaghetti time. They're all over the place. So we'll give you a couple seconds to get your answers in there. And I'm gonna see if I can see what the answers are coming in here. And it looks like most of it is some or starting to pile up. Looks like that's roughly almost 90% of you. The remainder is bring on the meatballs. I don't see one person that said none yet. So Jana, we can go ahead and close that out. But that's pretty telling that everybody's got some level of concern or issue with enterprise integration. So as we jump back then through this, let's look at our picture again here. And we've got all of our applications. So how do we solve this problem? Well, the first thing that we're going to do is, I know this is a dangerous thing to do with a lot of PeopleSoft people on the call here, but from an integration perspective, we want to remove PeopleSoft from the center of the universe perspective. PeopleSoft will be another integration point at the enterprise layer level, but it should not be considered the middle. And that's because, just like any other application, you don't want that to be the defining point that everything has to go through. So if we move that one out of the middle and we bring in something else that's going to help coordinate all this stuff, an integration platform, you'll see in just a second how that helps address some of these challenges. So what is this integration platform? It's all going to start with the concept of centralized integration. An integration platform, you've probably heard of things like a service bus or message-oriented tools of different kinds. There's several different platforms that are out there, but what they do is specialize in connecting to anything and everything. They can connect to your applications, your databases, your file systems. They can connect to outside entities, web services, whatever's out there. And they're also, the best ones are application agnostic. So even though they may be created from a vendor that also happens to build applications, that's fine as long as their integration platform sits independently. And that's important because you don't want your integrations to be proprietary or based on the presence of one of your applications, right? So obviously in the PeopleSoft world, integration broker is a huge component, and it's an integration tool within PeopleSoft. But you wouldn't use integration broker to connect, say, SAP to Salesforce, right? That wouldn't make any sense. So even though there are some tools associated with products, the best centralized integration platforms are the ones that are not attached to any one application. If you want to replace or upgrade that application, you don't want all your integration to go out the door as well. They have specialized tools for data mapping, adding logic so you can orchestrate processes. As you start sharing data between applications, sometimes there's questions that need to be asked or logic that you need to put in there. There's very frequently different levels of mapping that you need to do to get data from one system to the other. These systems specialize in that. Such centralized integration platforms specialize in doing just that. The other unique part of this is if everything's going through this centralized integration hub, so to speak, what you do is you start getting a lot better visibility. You start seeing all the transactions, where they originate, where they go to. You start being able to monitor things better, troubleshoot things better, and even control and secure things better. If you can control that security in one central place, now you don't need to worry about somebody using flat files and accidentally leaving one on a file server somewhere that maybe isn't secure. And now that sensitive data may be accessible to others. So that centralized integration, monitoring, and management become very, very valuable. There's also a lot of options available for these integration platforms. They can be in the cloud, they can be on-premise, they can be a hybrid of both. And they've made a lot of progress in the last decade. There have been integration platforms around for a long time, and in the past, they were very big and heavy, hard to learn. You had to get a whole set of servers and a big team to come and manage all of it. That's been greatly simplified. The integration platforms are leaner. The technology behind them is better, and those barriers to entry have decreased significantly. So that's a big reason why it's becoming more and more popular today, and we'll talk a little bit more about it in just a minute here. So let's look back at our picture again with an integration platform in the middle. And now, rather than all these applications directly talking to each other, they're using this integration platform in the middle. And that is very significant, because now, if you still need to replace this order management system down here, now you're not going back to all those other applications and changing what they do. They're all just sending their information to the integration platform. The only thing you'd need to change is the integration platform talking to your new order management system. That greatly reduces the effort for changes, makes you more agile. And again, the integration platform, its purpose for existence is connecting to other applications. So the speed at which you can get an application integrated with an integration platform is going to be faster than if you have somebody that knows one proprietary application trying to go and figure out the schema or something for another remote application that they're not as familiar with. So a lot of benefits that come out of this, and you can see we're addressing a lot of those concerns that we mentioned before. So let's look a little bit closer into this. Now, I promise I won't get too technical. My goal for this presentation is to make it pretty friendly for folks on the business side, as well as introducing concepts on the technical side without getting too into the weeds. But just to show you a little bit about what's happening here in this picture, the integration platform that sits in the middle is facilitating interaction between any consumers of the data. So that could be a mobile application. It could be another system. So maybe this is your HR or CRM system that needs to get data from this database data source on the left. It might even be a bot, for those of you that maybe are interested in using bots for customer service, or Internet of Things, where you're bringing in data from different devices around, a city, for example. Whatever needs to get to the data would go through this integration layer. And this integration layer, again, can connect to anything on the other side: database, application, file, external web services, whatever it needs to be. But again, it provides that virtualization so that the end consumers don't need to know where the data is coming from. You can hide all of that complexity. You can also add some governance in there at that level. Like I said, making sure that you're fetching the data the right way, making sure you're putting security in place. Now, I'm going to break for 1 second here, because of a term that a lot of you are probably hearing in the market right now is the term API. And just to show where that fits into things here, I'm going to describe that a little bit. So basically, an API is very similar to what we were talking about with these services from that integration layer. But when you're talking about APIs, usually what that's referring to is adding a layer of API management to those services. And that involves the ability to put policies on there. That policy could be to help limit usage, secure it with username, password, or OAuth, or whatever technology you want to use. It could be helping meet SLAs, like, you know, this service can only be called 50 times in an hour. A lot of different value of adding these policies to the use of these services, and that's really what, you know, differentiates them. And when we start calling them APIs, is adding that API management side of things to it, so you know who's calling it, how often they're calling it, you can control it, and you can get some analytics out of it as well, which becomes very valuable as you start not only wanting to integrate your systems, but also get some insight from them as to what's going on. You can see how often people are calling certain things, and you can react real time to those things in some cases, which is fantastic. So let's go back now to our diagram, and you can see on here you had a customer service in the middle, and now we've added a layer here for APIs in front of it that can be managed that will help control the access and the use of that service. So while these consumers, some of the things I put on here may be indicating external consumers outside of your organization and network, it's the same for internal and external. You'd still have to go through these policies. You could have different policies if somebody's calling it internally versus externally. A lot of ways to secure the access to this. And I actually talk a lot now with data architects and data stewards for exactly the model that's shown here, because now instead of everybody trying to figure out how to get customer data for their own needs, the data stewards can now say, yeah, if you need customer data, guess what? There's an API for that, a customer API. And that's what everybody's going to use. All those extra connections to databases or logins to other environments or reports that are getting emailed out, those can all get cut off. And you can say, okay, if you want customer information, you use the customer API. Now, you can help them deliver that in a way that may be more suitable for them. And, you know, obviously just telling some of your business users to use an API, that might be overwhelming for them. So you can utilize that on their behalf and give them an easier way to see that data, but it should always go through that customer API. Now you're enabling your other groups to get the data that they need. The customer API would be the central way to get the customer data. So when your auditors come in, imagine this is an employee API. Okay, show me who's got access to the employee data. Well, you look at the system where your employees are stored and who's got access to them in that system. Outside of that, the only people that have access to are the ones that have access to this API. So it makes things much easier to control and manage, much more auditable. The other thing that these APIs can do for you is you start moving into more of a cloud-based environment with a lot of SaaS applications. Some of those SaaS applications, the more often you hit their web services to get data, you might start incurring some charges from them on that. They do track all of that usage. So if you have this great service in place for you know, getting your opportunities from a CRM system, for example, and somebody says, this is great, I can go hit that API and get all this information, and I'm going to hit it, you know, 60,000 times each 30 minutes and get all this information. Well, that's great, but what's it doing to your SaaS application? Now maybe you're actually incurring some extra cost over there. So you can put some limits in place on those APIs and say, hey, let's only let them hit it up to X number of times per hour. So there's a lot of control you can get from this in a world that really demands connectivity, but also you don't want to let it get out of hand. All right, so jumping on then to a little bit more description, and I hate word heavy slides, so I apologize, but I want to go through a few of these concepts really quickly. We've touched on some of them. The value of the centralized integration platform and APIs. So first of all, data integrity and reliability. Like we mentioned, IT would be the one that builds these APIs. They know the right way to go get the right data to make sure that it's accurate, make sure that it's reliable. They can also make sure that the integration platform is set up in such a way that it's always there, always available to you, unlike some other ways of getting data. So data integrity and reliability, reuse. We mentioned a customer API, but we'll see in a second that maybe we're adding more APIs. As those APIs start adding up, you create a library of APIs internally for your organization. Reusing those creates a much faster time to market when you're building new initiatives. We'll see a little bit more about that in just a minute. Simpler maintenance and stronger governance. I think we beat this one to death already. Simplifying and bringing things in that centralized place allows you to have a smaller team managing and maintaining this stuff. It allows better visibility, better troubleshooting. You're looking in one place versus 20 different places to try and figure out what went wrong with your integration. Application architecture, agility, and flexibility. We mentioned being able to swap out an application or upgrade it. That's an important aspect as well as you're trying to compete in the market today. You don't want to be hand tied to any of these applications that you've got. You want to be able to upgrade them and replace them as needed to better do your business, and this layer will help you do that. A lot of organizations now are actually using this as a way to remove IT as a bottleneck. IT becomes more service oriented, so to speak, and that they're looking at the needs of the business and they're releasing APIs to the business so that the business can be more self-sustaining and they don't need to come to IT each time. They can look at this library of what's available. We had one organization that put APIs in place, and one of their departments wanted to create a mobile application. So they went out and they found a consulting organization that specialized in building mobile applications. And then they came back and they were estimating it'd probably be 3 to 4 months before IT would be able to get them the data. But when they brought it up, IT said, oh no, we've already started an approach where we've got APIs. Here's the library. What do they need? And it was simply a matter of granting access. And literally they had everything that they needed already there. And that outside firm was able to come in and start doing stuff, and IT never had to get involved outside of just granting access to those APIs. And since those APIs were built by IT with central governance, they know that only the right people can call them. They're giving the right data. And so all the security is already taken care of, and that outside organization would only get access to what they need, and they were able to build that mobile app. So very cool story. Technology modernization and standardization, this basically encapsulates all of these things. As you start getting more and more up to date on your technology across your organization, you're taking advantage of things like IoT, and digital transformation is another key term you hear out there a lot. This is a foundation to that. This is what allows everything to connect with everything else and becomes a core part of digital transformation and technology modernization. All right, so a couple quotes here that I thought were relevant. These were both from Forrester Wave. They had a report out earlier this year. Making data usable for analysis in 12 to 24 hours was just fine in 2010. But for 2018's real-time businesses, data needs to be available in less than 60 seconds. This is somewhat in line with what I was talking about earlier with the tolerance for waiting on data is going away. Even more telling from that same report from Forrester, hard-coded interfaces between applications cannot continuously evolve the way businesses need them to. As interfaces become more complex, there's no alternative to using integration technologies to automate the monitoring, development, and maintenance of interfaces. So Forrester's flat out saying you have to do this. And obviously, it can start small, and it all starts with a strategy and seeing where you can drive benefits from this. But it's definitely becoming more and more expected and more the norm in organizations. So with that, we'll jump into poll number 2, and Jana will get that kicked off. But this poll asks, how do you feel the benefits of centralized integration would impact your organization? So kind of similar to the first question, but I guess a little bit different. Would this be a huge game changer for you? Maybe positive, I guess, but not really something that's blowing you out of the water. Or you don't think you'd gain very much from it at all, or you already experience all these benefits. So I'm curious to see what our responses look like on this. We're seeing a lot of feedback. 100% of the answers are either a huge game changer or would be positive, I guess. So I think that's pretty telling as well. So Jana, we can go ahead and close that down, but appreciate those of you that are jumping onto those polls and doing that. That I think gives me good feedback as we're going. All right. So we'll jump on then to the next slide here. And we've talked a lot about these concepts and that it's valuable. I think I've driven that point home a lot. Now let's bring it back to PeopleSoft, the tools that PeopleSoft brings to the table, and how does this relate to those? Does this replace those? Do these work with it? Let's take a look. This stuff probably looks familiar to some of you. This is PeopleSoft on the left side and Integration Broker on the right side here. Integration Broker was built and added as a layer for PeopleSoft specifically for integration, things going in and out of the PeopleSoft application. This helps solve one of those things we talked about earlier, which was everybody figuring out their own way to get data from an application. PeopleSoft saw that happening and they made Integration Broker a more powerful engine to give everybody a standards-based way to do it, so they're not negatively impacting the PeopleSoft application. So REST, SOAP, those are web services. I'm not going to go through all these different types of ways of interacting, but you can see it gives you quite a variety of ways to get data in and out of PeopleSoft. Internally, all of these different methods follow then a standard approach of either using people code and application package classes to then go down and interact with component interfaces or batch processes, which is what will actually ultimately modify the database as needed. So PeopleSoft knows that the data integrity will remain intact, and they can give a nice set of utilities for people to interact with those things, and that solves part of it. What we don't want to do here, though, is consider Integration Broker as that centralized integration platform for your whole organization. So Integration Broker is still considered part of PeopleSoft, and therefore, even though it's got the capabilities of going out and reaching out, touching other systems directly, that would still be considered a point-to-point integration. So you need to be careful with that, because sometimes we get these tools in place, it makes it look easy to go out and connect directly. You want to avoid doing that, because again, if you were to do integration that doesn't include PeopleSoft, this Integration Broker will not be available. So you don't want to have multiple different ways of integrating all your different systems. Again, that creates more point-to-point. So let's take a look then at what these application-specific integration tools mean and why they're out there. So like PeopleSoft, most applications do offer some proprietary tools for integration, and they will give you a lot of capabilities, like I showed with the Integration Broker, where you can use RESTful services or SOAP services to access data. That's very valuable and is a supported approach to get data in and out, and we want to utilize those. So while some are more advanced than others, some applications give you more advanced tools than others, you do want to take advantage of what they do give you for getting data in and out of that application, but you don't want to use that to connect directly to other applications. They're not up to date with all the latest security standards, but what you can do is have that Integration Broker interact with your integration platform. It makes the work from the integration platform that much simpler, because now it can just go and interact with a RESTful API from Integration Broker to interact with PeopleSoft, for example. That's of great value. So let's take a look at this now. And as I said, what we don't want to do is use Integration Broker to directly connect with these applications. That's going to create more of a point-to-point issue. So the big red X obviously means don't do this. What we do want to do is put that integration platform in there and all the value that it brings to the table. We talked about centralized monitoring, auditing, standards, making sure it's highly available so that data can always be accessed, and the great capabilities that it has for connectivity and orchestrating business processes. So you put this integration platform in the middle, and then any other applications out here that might have their own tool set as well would also interact with this platform. So it gives you that standards-based way that's acceptable by each application to get data in and out, but you get the benefits of that centralized platform. So let's jump over here then as we go. Oh, one extra step on here is that API management piece that I mentioned. You get the value of the policies, the security and everything, and you would expose these things potentially as APIs. So while the example I just gave was an integration from one system to another, the other thing these platforms give you is that ability to just expose APIs where you may not know who is going to consume it. You know, you might put that employee API out there today, and maybe in 3 months, a whole new initiative comes up and is going to need to use that employee API. So you can expose these APIs as part of that platform as well. And now just getting information from PeopleSoft, no longer do they need to know how to connect to PeopleSoft or anything like that. They just call the employee API. And that's universal within your organization. If you need employees, call the employee API. Again, if you were to upgrade, modify the application behind the scenes, whoever's calling that employee API is not affected by that. They get to keep doing business as usual. And that's a very powerful thing for agility. So let's look at an example here. We've got PeopleSoft up here with integration broker like we just talked about. We've got a corporate LDAP. We've got a facilities management system that maybe manages who's got key card access to get into what building. And you've got a recruiting SaaS application up here on the right, maybe Taleo or something like that. So an example here could be that you have an employee onboarding process. So once Taleo converts somebody from a candidate to a hired employee, the recruiting application will send that candidate information and the job details into an employee onboarding API. And that's something that exists in your integration platform. So you develop that, you allow that to accept the data from your recruiting application. And then internally, that API would call 3 others. One would be an employee API. That employee API talks through integration broker to get data into PeopleSoft. Maybe it also gets out a new employee ID and utilizes that to pass on to the corporate LDAP. So now you've got an employee ID, and the LDAP maybe gives you the email address. So you get some data back from that. This user API that's communicating with the LDAP maybe communicates with a web service call. And then at the bottom, you've got an access API that's for building access. And maybe your facilities management system is a little bit older and doesn't have anything more sophisticated. It just requires files to be imported and exported. Well, that access API, it talks files just as well as anything else. So while we don't like having files in there all the time, it still works just fine. We can drop files or send files into the facilities management system to update that usage or access rights. So that's one way these APIs can work together. And now this recruiting application doesn't need to worry about, am I going to integrate with PeopleSoft and LDAP, facilities management? You've got this big list and trying to figure out how you map all these things and how to orchestrate all that. No more. All they need to do is call that employee onboarding API, and it'll take care of everything. Now, the other benefit of this, let's look now at another situation. You've built those APIs out for this recruiting application. They all still exist there in the middle, but now you have another need here. Now we're going to look at an employee promotion API. So within your HCM system, an employee gets promoted. They have a new role, and they call this new employee promotion API, which can go reuse that same user API to update information in LDAP for their title, for example. And then they can call that access API again as well and give them access maybe to the data center now because they've been promoted to that next level. So we can reuse those APIs and save a lot of time, get a quicker time to market for this new solution. So that's some of the value that APIs bring to the table. The other thing that they bring here, oops, sorry about that. The other thing that they bring here is the concept of innovation. I always like to use the example of Uber. They're an organization that really was started based on finding APIs that were available in the world for taking payments or looking at maps and geolocations. And really what they did is they said, I got a group of people that need a ride and I know where they are from their phone. And I got a group of people that are willing to give them a ride. I know where they are. And I have maps that'll show me directions of how to get from place to place and how far it is so I can calculate a cost and I can accept payment on it. Those are all APIs that exist. So they built a billion-dollar organization based on those concepts. You can do the same thing internally in your organization. As your different lines of business start looking at the APIs that are available, they'll start thinking of new ways of using them to better go to market, to serve their customers better, give a better student experience. This is how things like the connected cities come together. So innovation is another great side effect of this integration approach because of that reuse and the security that are already in place. It gives you a lot of tools in your tool belt to go to market. So that brings us to our final poll here. Jen, I'll go ahead and let you kick that one off. As more organizations leverage APIs for integration, data access, and innovation, where do you see your organization in the mix? Do you feel like you're already there? You're in the process of doing something like this? It's a future vision, but you're not really sure when it's going to happen. It's not going to be in the near future. Or, you know what? We love our flat files, we love our FTP, and we're sticking with it. So let's see what we've got here in terms of our responses. I don't see anybody saying they're already there. The majority here are future vision and in the process of doing it. There are a few in here that are saying abandon our FTP, never. So again, it's bringing back what is the value you get from these solutions and making that business case to see how these play in and when you should look at them. That brings us to our last topic here, which is modern integration, how to get there. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail here, but basically just some of the things to consider. The first thing and the most important part is just starting with an integration strategy. We talked earlier about how this is something typically owned by central IT. And one of the challenges that I have as an integration leader is a lot of times an integration need will be initiated by an application group. So you guys are managers of HR applications or financial applications, you have integration needs. You're probably not overwhelmingly concerned with the enterprise integration strategy. You just want your stuff that needs to go in and out of your application to work properly and to get in place quickly. So working at this from a application specific perspective is going to be more difficult because it's not in your budget to solve this problem for the whole company. But the group that is very relevant to this is the group that's hearing all these integration needs from the HR group, from the CRM group, from the financials group, all these different applications saying they need access to data, IT. So IT is hearing all these needs coming in. They can either solve them one by one, or they can put a solution in place that's central, and then all those application teams benefit from that. So that integration strategy, while it can be initiated from a specific application team, it really needs to look holistically at the organization, and usually that central IT that takes that role on. So if this isn't something that's on your plate to make the decision, what you would do is you'd be able to benefit from it, and you can talk to central IT about getting involved and seeing if there's a way that that this could be put in place, because every application, the integration for upgrades and new applications being implemented, those implementations become much quicker when you've got this standard set of APIs in place versus having to go out and connect directly with all those other applications. So you get all the benefits from it, but you do need to work at more of an enterprise level to put this model in place. So a few of the things that you would do in preparing that strategy is, number one, kind of what you're doing today on this presentation, is just get educated on the technology, the approaches, what's going on out there, and then start to make a business case. Where would this add value for you? Maybe that's specific to your application. If you are in IT, then you can look at across all of this. Now, if you're looking more at, like I said, IT as a service, where you're able to serve your different lines of business better by offering up these APIs so that they can be more self-sufficient. We do have organizations that we've worked with that now it's more of a self-service model for, you need data access, you go out there and you request access to the proper APIs, you get that access and you're off and running. That model has led them to be much more innovative and much more quick to market on any of their new initiatives. You want to formulate that value proposition for centralized integration. And that's something that my team helps organizations do a lot, is looking at quantifying this and developing an ROI. Central IT support, like I said, is fundamental to this, I believe. This really should not be owned by one group. And then there's a lot of platforms out there that you can utilize for this type of thing. Evaluate those, look at what's important to your organization and see which one delivers the right solutions for you. I purposely did not mention any of the integration platforms that are out there in the market today, because I didn't want this to become a vendor comparison type of thing. More of the approach and getting you guys informed on why this is important and the value it can drive for you. So after you've looked at the platform options out there, as you're starting to think about implementing something, identify some pilot projects where you can really recognize some value and gain some momentum with this, and then start growing it. This is not a big bang approach. This is something that should be done. You start with something, you show the value, and then you start adding more and more APIs as you go. Governance is very important around people, process, and technology. Standardize how things are done, and that will allow you to grow and scale much more easily. And then finally, just implement it. And again, these are things that Sierra-Cedar does, and we can help you through this process, because it is sometimes a complicated process. But these are the steps that you would go through. So with that, I know we've got about a little less than 10 minutes. I'm going to turn it back over to Jana to see if we have any questions that came in. Jana?
Thank you, Mike. Thanks, Mike. This has been so informative so far. We have received a few questions from today's attendees. The first question we have is, we're thinking of moving PeopleSoft from our data center to the cloud. Will this integration approach work for us? And if so, is it better to put the integration tool in place first, or move our app to the cloud first?
That's a pretty common question, actually. If you have the ability to make that decision, I guess the answer is you can do it before, during, or after. You could implement an integration solution before, during, or after a move to the cloud. A few things to consider there. If you have it in place before, you could take advantage of it, and that move to the cloud will be much more simplified, because again, if other applications are using those APIs to interact with PeopleSoft, if you pick PeopleSoft up and move it to the cloud, those APIs don't change for everybody. All that you do is have that integration platform now point to your PeopleSoft environment in the cloud, and everything would work as normal. So it simplifies that. Other organizations that have either already moved to the cloud or have that project started and can't wait on putting the integration platform in place, do it after the fact. And that's not a bad thing either. It's important to get it done, whether it's before, after, or during. And doing it afterwards sometimes can be handy too, because you've already got those mappings in place. Even though they're direct point to point, you know what data needs to come in and out, and you know that flow. So rebuilding it with an integration platform will give you that centralized value that we talked about, and it'll simplify what data you need to get, because you already know that. Doing it in parallel with a move to the cloud can work as well. I would just warn you, make sure that you're not overloading certain resources. If IT is really focused on moving things to the cloud, and then you drop the implementation of an integration platform on them as well, you want to make sure that you're not setting everybody up for too much work, right? So that would be my only concern with doing them in parallel, is just making sure that there's enough bandwidth at your organization to handle that. But definitely, whether it's before, during, or after, the integration platform will drive value for you.
Thanks, Mike. We have another question. Our next question is, we use an ODS to centralize our integration needs, and it works. You didn't mention that approach. Can you comment on that?
An ODS, so I'm assuming they're talking about an operational data store, for those of you that are familiar with that. Some people call it a reporting database. The concept here is similar, where you want to have a centralized place where everybody can get their data. And so they replicate data from different applications into the centralized data store, and then everybody can access it from there. There's a few different trends going on with this. Number one, I would say there still is a place for operational data stores, and I'll walk through some of the use cases that I think justify that. In a lot of cases, though, if you have an API layer or the centralized integration hub in the middle, that can kind of mock an ODS, right? It still gives you one central place to get stuff, so everybody would still go through APIs. That keeps it simplified for the consumers. But the APIs, what they can do that's different is they can actually reach out to 1, 2, 3, 4 systems, grab data from those, consolidate that, and return the result set. So very similar to what an ODS does, you could do that without the need to replicate that data. You can find a lot of articles out there about, as soon as you replicate data from one place to another, that data is immediately obsolete because it's not from that system of truth. It's not from that source system, and any changes, depends what the delay is to get those changes there, or you're just replicating the data for no need. The times when an ODS still makes sense would be if that data requires some preparation. So you have to do some significant transformations or restructuring or consolidation of the data before it can be used. This would be relevant for things like a data warehouse, where you need to create cubes and dimensions. Or if you need to pull together stuff from a bunch of systems and go through a bunch of pre-processing, you might want to do that ahead of time and then store that new structure in an operational data store or a data warehouse or one of the other data lakes or data marts. There's a lot of different variations now. Another thing would be if the demands for that particular data were so high that you don't want to be hitting that transactional system directly. You want to replicate that data out, and that's more important. Not impacting that system is more important than having the absolute latest data. So that would be another reason to put that into an operational data store. And then I've also had a couple organizations that just had concerns about the availability of those source applications. Maybe they have routine maintenance or something like that, but they need a 24/7, 100% uptime source of getting that data, and they'll replicate the data out for that reason, so that it's accessed through that ODS, which is 100% of the time there. So those are some times when an ODS would make sense. But even if you have an operational data store or a data warehouse, I would say put an API in front of that. Because again, you don't want your end consumer of the data to have to worry about, oh, is it in the ODS or do I call an API? Everything is an API. Some systems, maybe you have feeding into the ODS and you have an API in front of it, and then you decide, you know what, we don't need to replicate this. We can hit that system directly. You can just repoint that API to hit the system directly. Now you're avoiding all that replication, and the end user didn't even know anything changed. So that API layer is still important. Even if you have an ODS in place, put it in front of it. And then try to reduce the replication of data unless there's one of those business drivers like I had mentioned.
Thanks, Mike. We have time for just one more question at this time. Our final question today is, I've handled integration for our system for many years. This stuff sounds a lot like service-oriented architecture. Is this basically the same?
Yeah, that's a smart question. Yes, there's a lot of similarities here. A lot of what you guys have probably heard in the past around service-oriented architecture or SOA gives you the same benefits here, right? That centralized monitoring, centralized management, the ability to apply some security to it. The main difference here is that, as I mentioned earlier, the technology has gotten better. It's lighter weight, and it's not as cumbersome to learn or put in place. So the benefits are similar. The approach on APIs is a little bit different also in that you're more focused on who's consuming the data. In the past, you would be trying to build these huge, big, massive canonical models to meet every possible future need. And you'd create a web service and tell everybody this is the only one that everybody gets to use, and you try to make it work for everybody. And in reality, it got so complex it didn't work for anybody. APIs have a little bit different approach where you're looking at who's that consumer and giving them something that's tailor-made to what they want. And you can do that pretty easily in the API world, even by reusing the core functionality and then giving them a little bit of a unique version of that that's kind of a small little piece that just makes it look exactly the way they want it to look, so that now those consumers are going to use those APIs and they're going to get that personalized experience, versus putting one thing out there and saying everybody has to use this, which never really worked and kind of hit some roadblocks. So I guess, was that the last question then, Jana? I think we're a little bit late on time here. I can jump on here to the next one.
Yeah, no, this was our last question. For those that we didn't get to, we will try to connect with y'all via email. Mike, thank you so much for joining us today, and to our attendees, thank you for taking the time to join us as well. As a reminder, today's webinar was recorded. You can use the link on this slide to access the recording, as well as view the previous webinars in this series. And thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.